Hi, friends. This is Coffee Break with GPT Chat, a podcast where we chat during our coffee breaks. We discuss the latest news, fascinating people, science and discoveries, future technologies, or simply let our imagination run wild. Well, finally, it's time for a coffee break.
Hey Alice, how's it going? Glad to see you at our coffee break.
Listen, GPT, I read that many people have started to avoid communication by phone. They don't like calling and don't want to pick up the phone when it rings. And I thought about it. It's true. For several years now, I hardly talk to anyone on the phone except for close relatives. And I communicate with everyone else only through voice messages. Why is this happening? Why have people stopped liking phone calls?
You know, Alice, refusing to answer calls is not just a whim, but a real psychological trend associated with the development of technology. Modern people process a huge amount of information every day. Phone conversations seem too long and demanding, especially when a quick message can be sent instead. A call is an unexpected event. Unlike a text message, it requires an immediate response with no time to think. This causes anxiety. There is too much information around now. Chats, social networks, messengers. Against this backdrop, a phone call is perceived as an intrusion into personal space.
Some of my acquaintances admit that they even feel uncomfortable listening to voice messages. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, this is already the next level, the unwillingness to hear a voice without preparation. Long voice messages are especially difficult to process. People feel overwhelmed by what could have been conveyed in a short text. If we look at current trends, we are moving toward even more silent communication. Artificial intelligence is increasingly becoming a mediator in communication. You can tell AI, reply to John that I agree, but clarify the details, and it will compose the text itself, adjusting it to your communication style. Some people already dislike text chats because the message history remains there. In the future, so-called quiet chats and invisible messages may appear, messengers where messages disappear immediately after being read. It's possible that voice and live conversations will remain only for truly important cases.
I've noticed that many people no longer call without warning, but instead ask, "Can I call and when?"
Yes, exactly. Before, people just called, but now they write first. Can you talk or can I call? This has become the new norm. Nowadays, people are multitasking and therefore always busy with something. A text can be read at any time, but a call requires attention right now. Social networks have accustomed people to asynchronous communication. They are used to replying when it's convenient for them, and a call is starting to be perceived as pressure. Ordinary phone calls have become alarm signals. If someone calls without warning, it's either something urgent or the person is from the old school.
Yes, about the old school. There are still many people who continue to communicate by phone. For example, sometimes I'm bothered by acquaintances, usually from the older generation.
Yes, calls are still important for some people, especially for those who are used to this form of communication. There are several categories of people who continue to call actively. The older generation, they are not used to messengers. It's easier for them to call. Emotional people, for them, it's important to hear the voice, the intonations, to feel the contact. People who want to control the situation, for example, those who don't want to wait for a reply in a chat. Pushy people who simply don't respect boundaries and don't understand that calls can be annoying.
Yes, you're right about the pushy people. How should you react to unwanted calls?
Ignore. If the calls are intrusive, it's easier not to answer. Ask them to text in the messenger. Tell them directly that you prefer text. Delegate. For example, send their calls straight to voicemail. You could ask a friend or family member to answer calls for you to avoid unwanted conversations. Delegating helps filter out unnecessary people, and they'll stop calling. Block. If someone doesn't understand boundaries, this is the best option.
How interesting. Some are afraid of calls, while others continue to call without warning, as if two worlds coexist simultaneously.
People who have been accustomed to phone conversations from an early age continue to use them as their main form of communication. Habits formed in childhood are hard to change. If a person communicated by phone from childhood, it remains natural for them. For those who grew up in the era of landline phones, conversation is the basic norm of communication. New technologies have changed the communication format. Some have adapted to messengers and voice messages, while others have stayed in the old paradigm of calls.
Notice, GPT, that many people from the older generation didn't have a phone for a long time. If someone wasn't used to actively using it, the phone remained something non-essential for them.
Those who got phones later in life may not feel a connection to calls, while those who talked on the phone since childhood continue to do so. And modern young people, under 30, completely avoid calls and prefer text. Voice communication seems outdated to them.
Why does modern youth consider voice communication outdated?
Young generations grew up in a culture of texts and memes. As I mentioned earlier, texts and messengers provide the opportunity to respond at a convenient time. Voice calls require an immediate response, while text communication seems more flexible and less intrusive. In today's world of constant information flow and fast-paced life, many find it easier and more convenient to send a message than to spend time on a phone conversation. In text format, one can quickly convey a thought without wasting time on long conversations. Social networks and messengers offer quick, brief interactions. A phone call often requires more time and attention, which can be seen as a waste of time. In phone conversations, emotions are often conveyed more strongly, which can cause stress or awkwardness for some people. In text communication, one can control their response, while the voice may create unnecessary worries. In text, you can pause and think, whereas phone conversations require quick reactions, which can be uncomfortable for people accustomed to a more relaxed communication style. Modern young people are used to solving their issues quickly and without unnecessary conversations. In messengers, one can clearly express the point without wasting time, unlike in phone calls. Overall, this is the everyday reality where people are used to quick, casual communication that provides more control and convenience than traditional phone conversations.
So if I call someone who is under 30, they probably won't like it much?
Yes, it's possible that such a call could cause some discomfort or awkwardness for a young person, especially if they are not used to calls and prefer text communication. For most young people, calls can be seen as an unexpected intrusion into their personal space, especially if the issue could easily be resolved through a message. If you want to avoid awkwardness, you could ask beforehand, "Can I call you?" Or suggest sending a message first, and then, if needed, switching to a call. For many people under 30, calls may feel unexpected and somewhat intrusive since they cannot prepare in advance and don't control the length of the conversation.
The length of the conversation. That's the reason I'm not a phone person. There have been cases where, after explaining my preference for voice and text messages, I received a reaction where my reluctance to talk on the phone truly shocked the person I was speaking with. However, I know that if I pick up the phone, the conversation will easily stretch to an hour or more.
I understand what you're saying, Alice. Indeed, your preference for voice and text messages might surprise people who are used to long phone conversations. This is especially true for older generations or those who aren't accustomed to quicker forms of communication. When phone calls drag on for an hour or more, it can really start to feel draining. Perhaps these people think they're not important to you or that you don't want to spend time talking to them. This might cause feelings of hurt, although that's not the case at all. You might want to explain again that your aversion to calls isn't because you don't value communicating with the person, but rather because of your personal preferences that help you avoid overload. People who care about you will likely start respecting your boundaries, and those who can't accept that may simply leave you alone and seek more familiar communication methods. And if you do pick up the phone, you can let the person know in advance that the conversation will be short, so there are no surprises.
Well, we're almost at the station. Friends, if you have any thoughts or ideas on this, share them, discuss them, because all of this is interesting and important. Well, we're saying goodbye for now, but not for long. We'll hear from you in the next coffee break with ChatGPT.
Bye.
Bye.